Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the live stream. It is 7 p.m. That means it's time to do a Blender hangout. And so open up Blender with me, and then we can jump in and start working on some stuff together. Tonight, I'm still going to be working on the spoon. I know I said I was going to move on, but there's some things I'd like to still cover, and maybe that can help you guys. So jump into the comments on Twitch or on YouTube. I'm going to be watching live, and you guys will have the opportunity to ask questions, and I'll be watching for those as we go. All right, so we switch over to my Blender setup. Okay, so for the past several streams, and this is going to be number 7 so far, we've been working on this project. The spoon is something that has taken up quite a bit of time, but I really wanted to get in here and experiment with detailing out something to a higher level. So we've been playing with blocking in details up to a medium level, and tonight we're going to play a little bit more with getting the spoon to a finished level. You can see down here we've got a bit more detail going on, and not so much detail, but refinement. And so that's kind of what we're looking at doing tonight, is getting in here, smoothing things out to where we've gone on the front end of this, and on all of these big surfaces, we try to add enough polys to sort of smooth stuff out. So there's so many here that you can't really even see the number. It's pretty dense, but that is going to be necessary for when we bake. So let's jump in and start sculpting away. I'm going to spend the first hour trying to get refinement up to a good degree and move as quickly as I can to at least get this front portion done. And then I'm going to go ahead and retopologize the spoon and then bake it, UV it, and then bake it. So that's what we're going to be working on tonight. So what I've been doing is looking at all of the details. If there's anything wobbly or out of shape, I've been using the grab tool with dynamic topology turned off because I don't want it to be clunky. And so any areas that are looking weird, I'm just running around trying to fix the shape of those. Some of that can be done with smoothing on a smaller level for the details, but for big shapes, the grab tool works best. So anywhere that I see some of these edges looking like they're getting lost or not being consistent, I want to jump in and kind of work on that stuff. So I'm going to use the pinch tool, and you can see as I zoom in here, we're still getting kind of clunky. I've got the smooth shading turned off for this mesh, so I'm just trying to make sure that I have the same relative density in the places that I need it, so that way any of that won't get baked into the normal map in a weird way as we get going. So let's take a look at this. We've got smooth stroke turned on, so can play a little bit with this right here. I've also got Y symmetry turned on, and so that is going to help us speed things up. Holding shift there just to smooth things down and try to get that going. I've also got auto depth in the user preferences turned on, so if you don't know what that is, under the interface in your settings, you can check auto depth and then zoom to mouse position, and those two things will allow you to, instead of using the object's origin or the cursor or any of these modes down here, it'll kind of override that and let you play with how your mouse interacts. And so if we look at auto depth, it's going to basically control the pan and the shifting and the moving. Wherever that mouse is, it's going to rotate around that location. So if I hold it over here, it's going to be over there, it's going to be over there. And then the zoom basically works the same way. So zoom here, and so I find that kind of speeds things up. depending on the workflow. And so in this case, I think it's a good thing. All right, so let's go back to crease. Actually, pinch. Okay. I've already gone through and tried to smooth things out as a first pass. If you go into Sculpt Draw, turn the strength down to something really low. Here it's 0.01. Basically, we are keeping that low. And then if you use Dynamic Topology at a lower detail size here, basically what it's going to do is if you brush over the geometry with this turned on, it won't really move the geometry, but it will subdivide it for you. And then if you smooth it in that area, it'll completely smooth out, so you can see what it's doing there. And I've got this set to relative detail, so I think that's all the settings that I need to kind of explain right now. And in case you want to follow along and play with that, so you can see what I'm doing, just quickly brushing over an area and then holding Shift when I go back over it to smooth that area out. And that's important because depending on what your effects that you want to have in the normal map, all of these little edges will be baked in. And so I like to go in and manually kind of mess with the detail size just to make sure that it's doing what I want it to do. And then of course we'll go ahead and turn on smooth shading when we actually bake, and that'll help as well. So just really quickly gonna kind of do this. Make sure we switch that back off for the grab tool. Okay, nice even spiral there. Okay. And let's dig in a little bit here. All right, use my tablets. All right, back to draw. And this is kind of the process. So you can see how it works. I'm not gonna probably sit here and do this whole thing because I'd like to move on to some new stuff. If you guys are interested in seeing me sculpt the majority of this, then you can go back to the other live streams and take a look at those, because I have spent several hours on this spoon model so far. This is actually part of a larger illustration that I'm working on right now. So again, I talk about that in the previous live streams. Here in a minute, I'll bring up the concept art so you can kind of see, if this is your first time tuning in, how things are looking. But same project. So here we go. Here you can see quite a big jump in the amount of detail. So you can really see what happens if we jump back over with the dynamic topology turned on and start smoothing. So definitely want to do that where we have a lot of detail happening in these areas up front. And then towards the middle of the spoon, we'll taper off our subdivisions because we don't need them. And then we can jump back in and play with, reintroducing those at the other end of the handle, because there's a lot more sculpting and definition that's going to happen there. So for this part, I'm not even really using the tablet. I'm just using the mouse and my keyboard to jump around. In this case, we might deflate some of this area here, get more of a consistent curvature. Inflating there. And I'm just shifting between holding control and not holding control, and that will switch between inflate and deflate. And that's the same for any tool. So these two options can be switched by holding control. Okay, so you get the idea. Let's go around and make sure that everything is sort of pinched correctly from our current perspective. We've got smooth stroke turned on to kind of help us achieve this look in a pleasing way. So I'm also trying to maintain a pretty relatively uniform zoom distance as I pinch around this entire curve. And that's just to make sure that our pinch kind of looks similar all the way around. All right, I want to do the same sort of thing here. So I'm going to pinch going into this area. Pinch around the outside of this shape here. Leading into that front curve. There you go. And deepen this in a little bit here. Zoom out a little bit. Let's see how that's looking. Okay, start here, go around. There we go. Okay, and it's just kind of like this process. We are moving around quick and trying to make economic decisions as we go, so we're not, you know, wasting brush strokes and things like that. Okay, so I do this quite a bit. I switched into crease and I wanted to switch into pinch. So switch that. Getting close here so we can get this detail pinched up right here. And then I'll come back and do the same thing on the lower part of this swirl. Okay. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a uniform pinch on every single edge that's part of this design. It just needs to kind of sell the highlights. All right, I'm actually going to go with clay strips. Carve some more of this out here so that we've got a bigger, more even tunnel. Go back and smooth that out. Okay, so anytime we do that, we're going to have to go back and re-pinch. Okay, let's make sure we're happy with how that's looking. Yeah, okay. So we're definitely going to want to go further in. And so I'm going to go ahead and try deepen. Strength is turned up quite a bit, so we'll just see how this works. Turn off smooth stroke here. There we go. Now it's using my pressure sensitivity and just whatever stroke I make to deepen this. Okay, still not really doing as much as I want, so I'm going to switch back into clay strips. Let's make sure. Let's turn off dynamic topology because I don't want to add any more down here as we zoom in further. And then let's just carve into this. Okay, let's see. Is that working? Pretty close. Like where it's headed. We'll just even this out a bit. Fix those creases really quick, or the pinches, and we should be good to go. Okay. So any of these areas where I see really big, you know, geometry that I want to kind of work with, make sure we have the dynamic topology turned on, and then smooth that back out. Switching that on and off really takes a toll on the system. So at this point, let's crease down. Let's undo that. Smooth stroke needs to be on. Okay, start here. And with that smooth stroke on, it makes it a lot easier to kind of define this inner channel here. And see, zooming out now with the relative detail turned on for the dynamic topology, it's going to remove geometry. So we can't forget that that's working that way. Undo this. Get to an area where I have a clear view of this entire section here. Okay, it's a little wobbly, so let's undo that. And if that is still a concern when you've got smooth stroke turned on, all you have to do is turn up your factor here. The closer you get to 1, the smoother the stroke will be, and the longer it will take to kind of swing around. Okay, so we'll kind of lose the crease as we drop into this area. We'll smooth this out. So I'm gonna turn this off. We'll smooth that away the further it gets into here. Areas of dynamic contrast like that really help to sell these detailed areas in your sculpt. Anytime you can add harsh edges up against soft spots, you're going to be able to really help your design stand out. So keep that in mind. Okay, so some of these areas that are getting a little wobbly, sort of like in here, what I'm going to do is kind of zoom in a little bit, and then I'm going to turn off dynamic topology, and I just want to flatten these out a little bit. Now I can't stay in one place with this turned up too much because it's going to basically just flatten everything. And so I need to rotate around as I use this to kind of, in a way, polish this up instead of flattening it down. And you're just trying to lose those edges where you don't really want them. So name of the game here is flatten and move. Flatten and move. And that just helps you kind of blend everything together. I'm only doing it in these areas where I feel like I've gone in and over-defined some lines that are creating little ridges that are being caught by the light. This is really where your matte caps that you're using for sculpting can come in handy. And if you're not able to see how your lighting is affecting the geometry as you rotate around, might be time to switch to another matte cap to help with what's going on. So I'm using a fairly light touch here. I don't want to, you know, wreck anything that we just spent time working on. Kind of see with dynamic topology turned off, you can also kind of pull out and then just really gently rake across the entire area here. So I'm gonna actually turn this down just a little bit. It's a little too strong there. Okay, so I'm not gonna get too far down into that. So I've already kind of worked on that. Do you want to play with flattening this edge here? Zoom in. Okay, the front of that spoon's kind of getting in the way. So switch into mask. Let's box select this entire front part here. Invert that and let's hide it. So I'm gonna undo that instead of inverting. Do this, okay. So now I can just work on this front part. So I don't want to get too close to this masked edge because it will pull away from the parts that are masked. So as long as we stay up here, we should be fine. So here we go. Okay, Alt M to clear that. Let's go back to flatten. Want to make sure this top part is kind of a little bit more flat rather than round. So I'm just barely touching the tablet, raking across the top of this in short strokes. And then occasionally we'll spin around and see what kind of effect that's having. I don't want it to be too flat, so. Okay. And that's the basic idea. So before we move on, we smooth up some of this area down here real quickly. And to do that, we're obviously going to need to have this turned on. Okay, turn this up to 4. So we're adding a little bit less geometry in these areas that are just wide open, but definitely enough to smooth out what's going on here. And I'm just worried about this intersection where it's transitioning into sort of the front of this spoon. Okay, so here, really lightly smoothing. Okay. Okay, let's do a final pass where we are going to crease things up. Make sure everything's turned on the way it should be. I've got smooth stroke turned on. This requires a little bit of patience as you get used to it. You gotta kind of go a little slower than normal and feel the rhythm of what's happening. Okay, now I'm gonna undo some of these strokes. Noticing what's happening here, it's getting unsmooth, and that's because we forgot to turn our detail size back down from the top. So let's undo the stroke back to here and change these maybe to a 2.5. And let's get going again. Okay, start back here to kind of lead into the stroke a little bit and pull it along kind of gently. All right, so we'll arc around here. Okay. Make sure that's solid the way we want it to be. It's looking good. Let's make sure our crease is fairly even coming around. Okay, don't like that stroke, so I'm gonna undo that. But a bit of a weird angle here, so I'm gonna spin around. Do it from this side. Okay, let's lead in from back here. See how that's tightening that up. Okay. There we go. And got a little bit of a weird hook going on there. So let's turn off dynamic topology. And we're gonna grab that and move it around. Okay. All right, I think we are getting close. Got a little bit left to do right here. Turn that dynamic back on. And smooth. Okay. All right, let's call this good for down here, and let's work on retopologizing. So what's great about this is since we have the majority of everything kind of blocked in, we are still working on details up here and kind of finalizing how that's going to look. But the silhouette is pretty much blocked in. So what I can do now is go ahead and just retopo the spoon, and then we will come back and finish the details up kind of out of order, if that makes sense. So if you are new to retopology, this will be a good kind of primer to kind of introduce you to the process. It's not really complicated. It's just one of those things that takes a little bit of time. And as soon as you kind of understand what the process looks like, it's just like riding a bicycle. So I'm gonna take a drink real fast and how are we doing on time? Okay, so that only took about half an hour. So let's see how we're going to kind of attack the spoon here. Switch back into object mode. So the reason for retopology is because trying to use a sculpture by itself when you're doing things like adding dynamic topology and things like that, where you're adding a lot of details, it's impossible. It takes up so much memory. And if you were going to do this for multiple objects in the scene, you can see we're already at over 2 million faces on just the spoon. And remember, the spoon is like one of, let's say 50 objects in the final illustration. So that's impossible. We can't be doing that. We're not out of memory and everything will crash, won't work. So what we have to do is we have to capture this detail in a texture map and then put that back on a lower res model that mimics the silhouette of the spoon, but is a lot lower resolution in terms of the poly count. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing tonight. So what I'm going to do is let's turn off our matte cap. I'm going to make sure that for all of these meshes that are sculptures, that we've got everything set to smooth shading for these. That's going to help when we bake the normals. You'll notice some weird artifacting happening, and that's just because of the GPU, so nothing to worry about. I'm going to go ahead and set this up to be the same material for both objects. So remember, we have one object here that was sculpted as an add-on to this original mesh, and I'll show you how to bake both of those into one map. So what I want to do is go ahead and create a new object. And one of the things that I thought when I did a test of this that would be good would be to use the original spoon mesh, because we've already got the geometry in place and we really just need to build on top of that to kind of build this out. So if we clear the location and rotation there, then it's pretty much in the same place. And there's little differences because in sculpt mode, I went in and kind of reshaped the silhouette of the spoon. And so we have to kind of adapt for that. But other than that, all we really need to do is make sure that this is sort of outside of the sculpt mesh in terms of overlapping. So that's to help bake the image map. So to do this, what I need to do is for the spoon that we're going to use as a base, I'm going to get rid of this material and I'm just going to create a new material. And the only reason I'm doing this is so that we get an interesting viewport color that helps us identify what mesh is on top of another mesh. So anything that's sort of bluish white is going to be the sculpture. Anything that's pink is going to be the retopologized mesh that we're working on. So I might lessen the intensity of that a little bit. Okay. So check real fast. All right. So if anybody's in the comments, got any questions as we go, let me know, and I will jump in and kind of explain what's happening. All right. So the easiest thing to do at this part of the process is to see what we can use that's already there. In this case, since I'm using a subdivision surface model to get started, really all we need to do is play with how this is working in the 3D viewport so that the pink mesh, which is the mesh we're working on right now, overlaps and is sort of caging in this sculpture mesh. And the reason for that is so that we can get all of those details like sort of transferred and copied onto the new mesh. But for that to work, it's got to be bigger than the original so that Blender knows how to project out those details. And so that's kind of what we're going to do here is use the pink as a guide to tell us when we're in the ballpark. So what we also need to decide as we go is sort of how many subdivisions we want to play with. And I'm going to leave the mirror and the subsurf live as we work so that we can play with these settings before we apply them. And I think in the practice run, I left this at 2, but we can also go down to 1. I think in this case, 2 is going to be better for the silhouette. I'm not as worried about anything down here. I'm much more concerned about the details up here and this sculpted part of the mesh because those are going to be visible above the cup as it's sitting in the teacup right here. And so this is going to be under the sort of under water or tea, and that's why it's not as important. So bottom is in good shape. I'm going to move this down a little bit. I'm going to nail the silhouette down a little bit better than this, and I think I may even have to add some subdivisions to compensate. Okay, so let's take the inside wall. Let's bring that a little closer. Okay. Bring that there. Pull this in a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and add a subdivision there to make this easier to nail this profile here. Okay, I want to go in as far as I can using these X and Y constraint until we see that peeking out, and then I know I've gone too far. So that wall is still pretty good right there. And now we can go ahead and move the rest of this in until we get into a better position. So it's just a give and take until you know that you're where you need to be. This part isn't going to be as critical as these areas with all the detail because there's not going to be a lot of normal information to bake here. It's just one big smooth surface. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time making sure all of that's perfect, but it is still significant. So you want to pay attention to that. Okay. All right. Okay. So you get the idea. Basically, we want to encompass this entire mesh this way. And now what we need to do is figure out how to rebuild this portion so that we can capture all these details. So the way this works is that I'm primarily concerned about the silhouette here of the spoon. And so ideally speaking, if we could create a retopologized mesh that it perfectly captures the silhouette and all the bends and curves from the sculpted mesh, that would be ideal. Anything that is in the middle here that is not part of the silhouette and the way this curves around from different angles, anything extra like these dots that are never going to really be part of the silhouette can be completely left out and ignored. And so the idea is to trim as much fat as we possibly can so that we're not wasting geometry. Okay, I just tabbed into the sculpted mesh by accident. Don't want to do that. Okay, better. There we go. All right, so before we jump into this area, I'm going to go ahead and reposition the spoon handle so that it's more in line with what we have over here. And let's get a bigger block in kind of in place before we get started on the small areas. So by looking at this light gray portion right here, I can kind of see where that's sitting on the surface. So I'm going to go ahead and add some more subdivisions in here because we're going to need those. Okay. All right. Okay. right, so check that. Looking good. And then obviously we'll have to come down here and play with same problems on this end for figuring this out. So let's start here and let's chop out this middle section and then kind of rebuild it to a better flow of this geometry. So I'm going to grab these middle faces and just delete those. Okay. Now let's just see what we need to do to kind of get this in place. All right, so to help us retopologize manually, what I'm going to do is switch this over, the snapping element down here into face mode. And then I want to check off align rotation with target, and then project individual elements on the surface of other objects. And now what happens when I start moving this around is if I hold Control, it's going to snap to the faces or the surface underneath, which is really, really helpful to help us, quickly block this in. So what we need to do first is make sure we've got the rest of this kind of in place where it needs to be. Okay. Make sure we're kind of connecting everything up and following where it needs to go. So you see how this is off axis. Now it's snapped onto the x-axis because we have clipping turned on in our mirror modifier. But if I hold Control after I hit G, it's going to snap along the surface of that mesh. So you can see it landed right on that surface. And that's kind of the point. That's what we want to be doing. All right, so let's start by kind of following the contour of this section here. And I want to just be mindful as we go that we're going to have to sort of connect all this up later. So you don't have to count as you go, but it helps to just keep that in mind. So here we're going to need another section because you can see how severely that sort of dips in on the side. And that will definitely be obvious from a silhouette on a top view, something like that. Now you can't add so much geometry that it's going to be a problem for retopologizing. You're going to lose the whole point of it if you just add in tons of geometry to compensate. But you need enough that from a distance you're not going to lose too much of that curvature there. You don't want it to look really, really blocky if you can avoid it. Okay, so let's see. In this case, we can also go back and reproject those onto the surface of the spoon underneath, and then pull those just slightly back off to help us. That'll make sure that we're not getting too far away from the original mesh underneath. So you can see how far back that was. Okay, something like that. So let's see how few points we get away with here on this surface. Okay, something like that. Okay, so here we want to figure out a way to terminate this into an existing edge. So in this case, joining those up makes sense. And then we can just start kind of filling in these gaps. So what I might do is could either add a subdivision here, which we're going to have to terminate somewhere else in here, but I think in this case it might be warranted because we're going to have quite a few vertices to play with here. Okay, so here we have sort of a flat area, so it would make sense to kind of join those up. And then we can come off of there to play with that area. Might make sense to do a cut straight through here. So let's use our knife tool. There we go. Go back to there, or maybe we need another point to pull that down. Okay, so in this case, just need to figure out how we're going to join all of this up as we go. See if we like the way that those edge loops are looking. I think I want to actually go a different way. So undo this. You can also pull off multiple vertices and hold control and project those simultaneously. Doesn't always work perfectly, but for the most part, it does what it's supposed to do. If you have too many of these sort of bunching up together, then you can pull one on down to the side and terminate it that way. Join these up here. Let's see. Let's do another loop down here. And you can see it's basically just like building, a puzzle as you go. All right. So got this extra edge here. We want to pull through. Let's go ahead and get rid of those. Any way we can save geometry, it's better to think it through at this point than to go crazy and add too much stuff. Okay, pull that down a little bit. There we go. And now it's just about finding good placement for these vertices so that everything kind of, again, is falling outside of this mesh where it needs to be. Not a huge fan of the way this is sort of terminating, so I might do something a little bit more like this. It's a little better. All right, I'm gonna check the geometry real fast. Definitely have a triangle there, so need to make sure this is terminating the quads. All right, let's see if we can get away without that right there. Okay, yeah, with the subsurf applied, we actually don't need that extra edge, so that helps quite a bit, because if you look at the pink mesh underneath, that's really what we need to be paying attention to. Yeah, something like that. Okay. All right, how are we doing on time? All right, almost an hour. So what I'm gonna do is wrap up this section right here, and then we'll just get into the baking so I can make sure I get all of this done tonight. All right. So follow that about as closely as we can. If we can avoid intersections, we don't want that to happen. So be mindful of that as we go. Okay. So I'm just projecting back down with control and then slightly moving those back up in the Z-axis so that we have everything kind of in place. So we want to follow this contour around towards the middle. And the important thing here is not that we get in here and we get all of these bumps and crevices blocked in with geometry, because that kind of defeats the purpose of baking the details. But what we want to do, again, is just follow big humps. So if you have trouble with this, zoom out and pay attention to the big things that you see, the big forms, because that is going to be key to making sure that you're not wasting a lot of geometry as you retopologize. And you'll see just how loose we basically get as we go and we get into here. We're not going to totally ignore features, but we're, compared to when we were sculpting or, what we would do with a subdivision surface model, this is quite a bit looser. Okay. Edge slide those, pull those back a little bit. And then going into this section, I want to come out to right where this wall, this big drop off would be between these two features. And again, I'm basically going to create a big hump that goes over and joins back up on the other side, because we don't want to ignore, that dip. It's a pretty big feature. And from some of these angles, you're going to be able to tell what that is. But I'm not going to model, that. It's almost impossible to get to an angle where you're going to see these in silhouette. So we need to just skip over that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up into there. And let's see. Start here, turn off clipping really quickly, turn it back on. Okay, join that up. Okay. So it might be a little hard to see what I'm doing right now, but I'll kind of explain as I go. So I want to cage this in this area right here, and I want to sort of encompass this as a big bounding box that's sort of getting that in there. And that's all I want to do. I don't want to spend any time making sure those details are there, because that's what the normal map is going to be for. Let's go ahead and just join this up, block that in on the top, and then I just want to make sure I'm outside of that detail there so that it's not pulling that in. Now it's important with clipping turned on that I don't get too close to the middle, because it's going to try to merge those vertices. So we want to get as close as we can without it being trying to do that. So what we might do is turn our merge down to even 1,000th lower. So something like that. And that's really going to be a shallow merge, but might be useful. So even there, it was too shallow for it to work. So maybe something like that. Now what we can do is basically just follow this in. So I'll go ahead and drop another down there, make a quad from that. And then we're going to connect this back up to the wall. Maintaining quads is going to be important for the subsurf modifier. And here we go. So we can select the row of vertices there. And then I can just go ahead and collectively extrude those up. Okay. So edge slide that down. Now you can see we're not quite coming out far enough on this edge here. So let's pull some of these vertices around until we get that effect. Let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to connect this up on this side. So since this is a big, definite ridge coming down through here, we are going to want to put an edge alongside of that, but that's it. That's all we want. So you got one started there. It's easy to kind of see what's going right for you and what's not. It's better. Okay. Join these up. So take the opportunity there to collapse those into one single quad on this edge. And if we were just polygonal modeling, this would be an issue because this would be sort of a non-convex shape. And we'd get non-manifold geometry warnings and all sorts of stuff like that. But because we're using a subsurf modifier, it's actually subdividing that again, which is sort of making everything planar again, or hopefully doing that. And that's why this works in this case. All right, so I'm going to attempt to do the same thing here. Hope that that works. Should. Okay. All right. So we'll pull these together here. curve back around here. So I'll create one vertical. So we have that new wall heading that way. And then those are already joined. So in this case, because it's so close to that curvature, let's just go ahead and make a quad. And we'll kind of deal with the curvature. So right there, you saw an opportunity to avoid adding in another edge loop, and that simplifies the entire shape of the mesh. And that's kind of the art of retopology, is knowing when to cut corners so that you can save that last bit of geometry. In this case, we're not really using this object for a real-time application, which is really where retopology comes into effect on a regular basis. So we'll probably go into some of those in another course or stream or something about things you want to be aware of when you're doing this for games or things like that. In this case, it's just a 3D illustration. So I'm not too concerned with what's happening there. So let's make a quad right there. All right, 8 o'clock. All right, so let's wrap this up. Okay. Select both of these. Okay. Okay, so we're just finessing sort of that into place. So you can see how this is coming along. Okay. Almost done with this now. These, again, we're going to go right over the top of because those are not part of the silhouette. See where this sort of tapers into the height so that it's the same. We can use that to our advantage to try to join this up here. That's why I really like using that subdivision surface modifier with this retopology technique, because it shows you where you know, adding in extra geometry is worth it and where it's not worth it as you're going along. So in this case, it's supposed to sort of be on the same level, so we can cap that off. And make sure we're doing the same thing over here where we need to. See if this will work well enough. I think it will. In this case, we don't really need much there, but let's go ahead and put the wall in. There you go, you can kind of see what that's doing. Got just a little bit of that tuck in there. And the rest of this, we are just gonna call good. So let's grab this here. Okay. Okay. Now we're cooking. Okay. All right, so these need to come up quite a bit. Okay, and the home stretch, guys. And the home stretch. Okay, we know since these are lined up, those are gonna have to be connected. So we'll add another cut there. Turn off clipping. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of this. We're cooking. All right. So, I'm gonna join this mess up over here. And we're good to go. All right, that's it. So, yeah, about 45 minutes. It's definitely not the most fun thing in the world to do, but it really makes a difference when it comes render time. All right, so you can kind of see the outline of our sculpture underneath, but it's sort of shrink wrapped itself onto the mesh. In fact, if you'd like to use the shrink wrap modifier to help you retopologize, that's a perfectly good way to sort of do what we just did without having to sit here and constantly project down onto the mesh. I just do it this way because I'm more comfortable. But there you go. So let's go ahead and leave the top part of the spoon for later, but I'll go ahead and jump into the process of UVing and normals. So if we isolate this mesh, still got the mirror and the subsurf. What I need to do is go ahead and UV map this. So let's create a new window. And jump in here and play with some of the edges. Okay, so I'm gonna cut this to where we sort of have the part here with all the details isolated, and leave the rest of the UV map kind of off to the side. So let's go ahead and cut there. And not super worried about seams because we can, use something like Substance Painter to get rid of those if we need to hand paint something. But in this case, I'm just worried about the normal map and how that's laid out for the details. Let's rethink this a little bit. I guess that'll work. Okay. So let's go ahead and use Control E, mark the seams. That's cutting through the middle all the way around. So that will be one separate piece for the handle and then two pieces for the spoon upper and lower. So if I go ahead and select everything, hit U and then unwrap, let's see what that's doing. And what I also probably want to think about is isolating the top half of this sculpted area. So we want to cut this right about there with another seam, and that will give us a separate mesh. Got to cut this all the way through though. There we go. Okay. So this part is not super important, and these parts are also not going to be as important. And all I'm really concerned about right now is the normals. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be baking the normal map, and I want to scale these separate UV islands so that most of the normal detail is baked into areas that are big on the map. Areas like the scoop of the spoon, the middle part of the handle, those can be smaller because we don't really need to have any of that detail baked. So we're not going to be utilizing that much. This area I'll scale up. I'd also, if we were going to be doing the other half, I'd probably make that as big as this other right-hand side of the map. But in this case, we can just leave this the way it is. And that's an option. Now, because we are using a mirror modifier, what I probably will go ahead and do is apply the mirror modifier. And before I do that, I'm going to make a copy of this. So let's jump out of isolated mode. Let's make a copy of the spoon, move it to layer 5 in this case. And now I can go ahead and apply the mirror modifier. Everything that we already marked seam-wise is going to mirror over for us. And so let's just redo an unwrap. And in this case, same issue. I'm not really concerned about this, so just want to get it out of the way. And that is to say, I'm not really concerned right now. Later on, I might be, but starting off, let's just see what happens when we bake these. So this is not sort of a finalized layout, but it's good enough for right now. All right, good enough to demonstrate what we're doing. So let's jump back to layer 2. Let's grab our spoon sculpture. And we don't need the upper part because we're not going to bake that right now, but let's just move, let's copy this with Shift D, escape, move that to layer 5 as well. So now we've got both of those sitting on top of each other again. And so now what we need to do that we have the UVs right here is we need to go ahead and create a new image. So let's call this spoon normals. I'm gonna make this 2048 by 2048. Hopefully that will work as we stream. I'm gonna go ahead and save this as spoon normals. Make it an RGB, 16-bit color depth, and yeah, let's just do a PNG. Okay, so now we got that saved. We're gonna go ahead and bake this. So make sure we got everything smoothed out. We're in cycles. We jump down to the bottom of the bake right here, menu in the render tab. Want to go to normal, make sure it's on tangent space normals. Everything else can pretty much be left the same. In this case, I'm going to lower this down to something like 4 pixels for a margin. Let's go selected to active. And then for ray distance, when I was testing this earlier, something like 0.25 worked well, but let's just start off with 0.5 and see what happens. We're going to leave clear on for now, which will wipe the image map before we get started. And what I want to do is select the sculpture first, like this. Then I want to shift select the retopologized mesh. So we're going selected, which is the sculpture, to active, which is the retopologized mesh. And that's what that means. Before we bake, we're going to have to make sure this image is selected in our material. So let's jump over to the node editor. And under material nodes, we need to add a texture, image texture. Let's make sure we are on spoon normals. This needs to be non-color data. That will come in handy later. And now that we have this selected, that's the last thing we have to do. Hit bake, and it will bake. So this didn't take too long last time I tested this. Hopefully it won't take too long this time. Got a few people watching. Anybody working on any cool projects tonight you want to talk about? I've also got some time here, so if you guys have any questions, we can chat about those. All right, so let's take a look at this normal map. So you can see from the inside of the spoon, the handle, and then the outside, there's not a lot going on. So you got some little indentations from not having smoothed out the surface as much. That does matter. It'll show up in the shadowing, but not a huge deal. So it doesn't need to take up a huge part of the image texture. You can see we need more pixels to take into account all the details that are in this part of the spoon. And that's going to be even more true for other parts. Now you'll notice that we're not getting any weird effects in areas like this. So it's a smooth fall off. It's what you expect to see in a normal map. Red, green, and blue data depicting the X, Y, and Z coordinates and how those bump in and out of the surface. But over here, we're getting some really harsh looking transitions. And so that's a hint to me that we've got some intersections going on. And usually this can mean a couple of things. One, it's that we have our geometry intersecting with the underlying sculpted mesh. And because those are crossing when it's trying to project the normal map, that can not work. So we have to make sure that if we look around, we're not seeing any of that other underlying sculpt mesh peek through. The other thing that can be is if you are using a ray distance down here, that can affect the distance that it's trying to project out from the sculpted mesh to the other mesh. So if that's turned up too high, it's going to self-intersect and go through the mesh to the other side, and that can be a problem. So let me show you visibly kind of how you tell what that looks like. So if we jump down in edit mode for our retopologized mesh here, under face normals, turn those on, and the size setting that you have here is the exact same setting for ray distance that you have here. It's in Blender units, so it's the exact same setting. So visually, if you look at the little lines coming out of the normals on the faces, that'll tell you how far it's trying to project if you make these numbers the same. So here, if we set it at 0.1, you can see even this is definitely enough to jump through to the other mesh. when we get into areas that are really tight, like in here. And so all we need to do is kind of turn this down until we get to a level that is a little less intense, and then copy that value over. So like I said, I tried, maybe it was 0.025, something like that. So let's try let's try 0.025. If you go too low, it's also not going to capture enough of the detail. So you want to kind of dial this in to a good value. All right, so now we have to do what we're doing again. Let's select the sculpture first, then the spoon, retopologize mesh, then the image texture, and that's the last thing you gotta make sure is selected, or this will give you an error. And then it's still set to clear, so we're gonna wipe the image again, hit bake, and take a quick drink. Okay, so a little different, but it's still a little better, but it's still giving us some of those weird, where it flips and the colors are getting all wonky. This should not be doing this. So we need to keep playing with these values until we find something that works. Now in this case, it might be too low. So let's turn this back up to something like a 0.1, and let's try this again. There's a sweet spot to hit, and that changes in every scene depending on your model. And so you just have to pay attention and make sure that you're looking at that. So it actually might need to be lower. I'm surprised. So let's go down to 0.01. Try this again. Luckily, this is baking pretty quickly, so it's not taking up too much time as we try this out. Yeah, okay, so that's less, so that means that we're heading in the right direction. So let's try 0.005. Almost gone, so one more time, 0.003. Hopefully this will do it. You can manually go in and paint this to fix this if it gets so low, but you can't really turn it down anymore. But in this case, I think we're good. Okay, so you can see that our detail is looking good here now. And obviously, same rules apply for all UV texture maps. You want to make sure there's not any stretching. We didn't check that this time, but that's important. So pay attention to that. You can check that if you jump into your UV map settings here, open up the properties panel within on your keyboard. And then if you check off stretch right here, you've got two options here that tell you how your mesh is stretching and reacting to the way your UVs are currently laid out. So you can check by the angle, which is how far the faces bend away from each other in terms of their positions next to each other. And then you've got area, which is obviously how distorted the entire mesh is getting as it's being unfolded and trying to be laid down flat on a flat surface. So areas in here, we're doing pretty good. Anything blue is really good. Anything getting into the red, you've got some issues you need to think about. So in this case, we'd probably do a better job if we went back and added some more seams, tried to unwrap in a bit more even manner, things like that. But for this particular stream, you guys get what I'm saying. This is the process for how you would bake. So that's kind of the process. I mean, if you want to preview this, we can go ahead and set this up with a basic material. So let's tab out of edit mode here. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab the spoon sculpture that we duplicated and get rid of that. And then with our retopologized mesh here, we've got our normal map here. Let's go ahead and save this. Make sure that that's somewhere on our hard drive so that we don't lose it. And now we can go ahead and set up a basic material to preview what this looks like. So in cycles, the way you need to set this up is if we jump into our texture that we currently have going. You're going to start with the diffuse. Obviously, your image texture that you just baked is right here. This needs to be on non-color data because it's a normal map and it's not using the color information. It's using the vector information. And so this is on color. Sometimes you'll get weird effects, and that's really the best advice I can give you is switch that to non-color. Basically what we need to do is put another node in between here and any of the other normal nodes that turns this into a normal map instead of just information. So we need to go to vector normal map. Obviously you want to match up the inputs and outputs so that they're the same color. So in this case, color will go into the color portion of the normal map. You can select a different UV map if you have a different one selected. Make sure this is on tangent space. And then this normal goes into the normal for diffuse, whatever you're using. In this case, we can switch this to something like a glossy. Turn this down a little bit. If I'm using Node Wrangler, I can hit Control-T to go ahead and automatically add this mapping node and texture coordinate. Control-X to get rid of that because we don't need it. And now we've got kind of a basic setup for a normal map that we just baked. So we need to add some lighting so we can take a look at how this is in our scene. I'm going to go ahead and just use something like Pro Lighting Studio from Blender Guru. Let's check off reflections. I like this a lot because if you're really in a hurry and you want to speed through and test out with some HDR images and some quick lighting, you're not going to have to sit here and set everything up from scratch, over and over and over again. So let's go ahead and pick a background that we might want to use. In this case, I'll just do something like this. Might not even need lights in this case. So let's go ahead and switch into rendered viewport mode and test this out. Okay, I'm going to isolate a section with Control-B. If I make this bigger, you can see with the normal map turned on and added to our diffuse or glossy, what it's doing there. And you can see how that looks as we spin around. It's looking. Strength will obviously dial this in for you. 1 is the default, and that's kind of how it baked. So you can obviously turn this up a lot more. If you turn this up to something, let's say 1.5 instead of 1, you're going to get a lot more sort of darkness in those cavities. And in this case, that's kind of the idea. Okay, so as we get into the rest of the stream tonight, we can do a couple of things. We can go ahead, since we've already got our retopologized mesh done and a basic material setup, tested it, kind of works. We can go ahead and refine the rest of the top part of the handle and work on that. Or we can go ahead and kind of get our texture into a better place. I'd love to jump into Substance Painter tonight and kind of, hand paint this up with some cavity maps and do all that sort of stuff. But for some reason, my version of Substance Painter right now is crashing my system. So I need to get that updated and fix that before I can do a stream with you guys. But you can see how this is working. Obviously, we'd probably want this to be a little bit more like sterling silver. So I might lower this down where you can actually see all of the reflections in this. And yeah, so it's actually working pretty well in this case. Bear in mind, we're so close now on this object too. In our final scene, you're basically going to be out here looking at the top of this handle. Now I am going to get this printed, and it's going to be a big poster and stuff like that. And it'll be a pretty big render too, but this part will be under the tea and the teacup. And so the top portion is really what we're going to be focusing on as far as the rest of this goes. But that's the basic idea. We can jump in here and start playing a little bit with the texture. So if you guys have any opinions on what you want to see and you're in the chat right now, let me know. And I'll start heading that direction as far as what to do next in the stream. So we can texture this up. We can keep sculpting if you guys want to see me detail up the top portion a little more, or I can add some dirt. Whatever you guys want to do. We can move on to another object. We don't have tons of time left, got about 20 minutes, but if anybody's in the chat and you want something or you have a question, let me know, and that's what we'll work on. All right, so I was playing a little bit with doing some dirt, but in all honesty, like doing this in Blender without painting it is not fun to do procedurally, just simply because the way that I would want to make this work is to use the normal map with a cavity map, and then sort of build in some noise textures to get dirt into those crevices and things like that. There's some simple ways we can do that with cycles as it currently sits. I think this is going to get better with the 2.8 release, but we can go ahead and play a little bit for the rest of this evening if nobody has anything else they want to tackle. And that's what we will do. So let's play a little bit with the geometry node here. Pointiness, if we cycle through these, will actually show you areas that are a little bit more like a crevice map would if you were in another piece of software. Oh, okay, MZ25, see your comment. I'm just glad to see the correct way to normal maps and how to see the ray distance. Yeah, that's really cool. I actually picked that tip up from a guy named Pierre Picot. I think that's his name. Anyways, he's a Blender artist. P2 is like his little logo, and he's got some awesome courses on the market. So check him out if you'd like to see some of his stuff. He's a good instructor. But yeah, normal maps are difficult because there's not a really straightforward way to do it. I think they're working on, easier ways to hook things up down the road. But right now, it's if you don't really know what to do when you get started, it's one of those things that can really take a while to understand how to hook everything up and do all that sort of stuff. So, anyways, so this is what pointiness looks like. To get a better view of this, if we use a color ramp, we can crush these blacks, and you can see kind of what this is doing. So everything dark is sort of, it's like an ambient occlusion, kind of, and is going in here. And then everything white is sort of sticking out. And so I wish there was a way to kind of use this with your normal map to feed one on top of the other. There ought to be a way, but I don't know how to do it off the top of my head right now. One of the things we do have at our disposal is an ambient occlusion map. And if we were to just look at this, you can kind of see what that's doing. So in this case, you could kind of combine the two. I wish the ambient occlusion shader had like a normal input, and we could maybe use the output as a color for another texture, or for a mix shader, but in this case, that's not something that I think will work. So we're left kind of playing with how to make this happen. Now, one of the things we obviously need to do is start layering things up if we want to play with this material. So right now we just have this basic glossy. We want to brighten this up a little bit so that it looks like really clean sterling silver kind of metal. Obviously it's very clean and polished, right? So what we want to do now is we want to create sort of an older weathered sort of spoon that's been used for a while. So every single part of the surface is uniformly shiny right now, and we don't really want that because that's kind of unrealistic. So what we'd rather do is we'd rather have parts of the material be worn and kind of scrubbed and scraped and scratched and buffed and things like that. It's been cleaned a lot. It's silver, right? So it's going to be a little bit more worn down. So we need to dial in something a little bit more diffused like this for the way that looks. We're going to plug the same normal map into this portion. Create a little node there. I'm going to save this real fast. Okay. So now that we have one material that's really clean, one material that's kind of roughed up. What we might do with the roughed up material, give it a slight tint of something like that. Lower the color a little bit so that it's a little bit dirtier. And then we can go ahead and add a mix shader and blend the two together. Now, right now it's blending half and half. So if we go all the way down to the left, we got the clean version. All the way to the right, we got the dirty version. Somewhere in the middle, we've got a combination. Now, if we want to just have it be applied to certain portions, in this case, the dirty would be applied to the outside, the clean would be applied to the crevices. We can plug this as the factor into the top here, and that will only apply the two materials based on this black and white map. So black areas have the one that's on the top, and white areas have the one that's on the bottom. So there you go. So if we play with the way this map looks, we can dial these in, slide them apart a little more, maybe change this to something like ease instead of linear, or we could even swap them, invert this. And now if we look at this, we've got some of this flipped. So now most of it is covered in that sort of grungy, and then only the parts in these areas down here would be clean. So probably not as realistic. Flip that back around. And what's great about this sort of thing is that once you've got this cavity map kind of in place, you can play with adding other sort of image patterns on top of it to create interesting effects. So let's make sure we got time. We got 15 minutes. So let's go ahead and grab a texture. Let's do a Veroni texture this time. All right, so now you can see how that looks as it's applied to the spoon right here. Kind of like the way that is looking right now. Might turn that up a bit like that. And then what we could do is play with let's do a color, and we'll do a mix RGB. And then what we can do is play with some of these effects one on top of the other. So one of the other things we can do is use a math node. Let's plug the factor into this, change this to something like modulo. And you can see some of the interesting effects we can get doing that. Let's add some weird things there. And then you can blend between both of them. So we could add or subtract. Get some interesting effects here. Could even go to the color, invert this before it gets thrown in the mix. Also, when you're live previewing, occasionally just save. Make sure you're doing that, because it will crash every now and then on you. All right, so let's take a look. That's interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Play with that a little bit. Yeah, so you basically just layer up this interesting, weird kind of map, and then eventually feed that into how it layers two of these textures, and you get some interesting, weird kind of stuff going on. Now to really tell a difference here, you would need to, sort of separate out these even more. So maybe something like 0.04, darken this down even more. Check this off on a different kind of reflection. Instead of GGX, we got Beckman here. And every single input can be tweaked, obviously to add more depth and more interesting things going on. All of these colors obviously are just single colors, solid colors right now. Ideally, you would have, an image that you'd plug into here that would be all sorts of weird sort of colors. So we could do like let's do a color ramp again. Plug that color into there. And then we can grab different colors. Different brightnesses. I don't want to make these super saturated. There we go, something like that. Those can be fed into the color inputs for both of the glossies, or you can duplicate a separate one for each of these, and that's just another way to kind of differentiate. So in this case, we might make the cleaner material a little bit more towards the blues. And I wouldn't saturate these a ton. Don't think they need it. Maybe keep these brightness consistencies a little bit similar to each other. But it just gives it a little bit of variation in terms of the way that the metal reflects, which can be a good thing. Every little bit helps add variation. Now, again, same thing can be done with the roughness. So if you want to play with how that's working, save this again, and then maybe for the way the roughness is working, we use something like a Musgrave texture. So let's take a look at the way this is working. Okay, so this could actually be used for something maybe more like water spots or something like that. Anyways, but with this mapped here, what you can do is, because we have a factor, you have a white and black map now that's mapped onto the surface of the spoon. If you take something like a color ramp, input that, the value that is currently in here for black, we can leave at a value of something like 0, which would mean, again, it's off. Or value over here 1, we could change that to something different. And so it doesn't have to just be 0 or 1. We could make this 2 roughness values. So in this case, if we have a roughness that we like of 0.05, we can use that as our base value. So 0.05, and then for this value, we might really roughen this up. So let's say it's a value of like 0.2. Now that's going to look a lot dimmer in the way you preview that. But now if you plug this into the roughness, just preview this, you can see how that pattern that it was showing follows that the roughness changes. And so obviously the closer you get these, the more subtle this is going to be. So maybe something like 0.1 is a little bit less obvious right here. We could bring the scale back down to something like 8, make this a little bit bigger. Something like this, goes through that, comes out on this side. So by the time you run it all the way through, you've got a pretty big spoon there. Pretty big texture there for the spoon that's got a lot of variation and makes it interesting. And that's just with 2, glossy shaders and playing with a little bit of the roughness, the color, and how they're mixed, you know? So there's a whole lot more layering. We can just continue to add mix shaders and get in there and add dirt and grime and fingerprints and whatever else you want. And so we've already added a normal map. Obviously, we could add a displacement map, a little bit of bumping onto the surface for other things that we add on later. And so it really just depends on what you want. But yeah, so that's the basic process for the spoon. I'm gonna go ahead and do what I said I was gonna do last week and wrap this up. And before we get going, I wanna kind of share a little bit where we're headed next. So let me turn this off and switch this over real fast. So obviously we're going to keep streaming Mondays, or actually Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 7 p.m. So 2 more days this week, 7 p.m. Central Time, I start streaming, and I'm trying to do a couple of hours at a time on this channel. So if you're watching on Twitch, follow me. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, hit the little bell because that notifies you when I go live, and you won't have to you know, come in the middle and miss it or anything like that. And I'm trying to do this 3 times a week to get started, and I'm obviously still working on some other things as well. So let me share a little bit about what else is going on right now. If you're just jumping in and you don't know anything about me, my name is Brandon Hicks. I'm a Blender Foundation certified trainer, and I have my own training academy where I show how to use Blender and other pieces of software for 3D artists. So let me show you a little bit about the new site. So I've been doing this for a while, different companies, but the most recent site that we just launched is called the Orange Guild. Now, this is a really cool site. Obviously, if you come over to the site, you'll see all the training that we have to offer. You can subscribe for free. If you sign up, click one of these buttons, you can create an account. We're gonna have free tutorials, things like that, that you can jump into, that we're gonna upload to the guilds. And you can also sign up to be on our newsletter, and you'll see those little pop-ups that allow you to do that. Click over here on the training. You can see the courses that we currently have available. These are all from me. So if you liked what you saw tonight, these will walk you through some more things. This one just got updated. It's all about subdivision surface modeling. These 2 are how to model a concept car that I designed from completely the ground up. And so this is all about cycles. This is all about building it with sub-D modeling. And then this is a complete foundational course for Blender. So if you don't want to buy all these individually, because it can get kind of expensive, and I understand that, you can join the guild membership right here, and that's $19 a month. So if you click on this or go to membership, you can see what we have to offer. It's 24/7 access. You can jump in, ask me personal questions any time of the day or night, and I'll jump back in within, you know, a few minutes up to 24 hours, and I'll answer your questions. I'm available to kind of mentor you through portfolios. So if you need to grow in some area, I'm here to ask questions and just help you through your whatever you need. And then you can see that it's $19 a month, $199 a year. If you want to try it out, we offer the first month free. So you're going to see a link in the description of tonight's stream or any of the streams that are already on the channel, on the YouTube channel. If you'd like to go check the link there, you can click that. It'll take you to the membership page with a 100% discount for the first month, and you can try this out. And so yeah, I would invite you to check it out. It's really cool. We're growing as you know, by leaps and bounds, trying to get new instructors that want to jump in. I'm doing some updates here and there, talking about what the new projects are. So here you can see some of the project updates for the course. This is the actual project we're working on right now that I'm streaming. So hope you guys enjoyed tonight. I'll be back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Central. So check me out, and I'd love to talk to you guys. So pop into the chat, and even if I'm not live, you guys can ask questions and I'll get back to you pretty quickly. So I'll see you tomorrow night. Thanks, guys.